Welcome to RNDTI Insights, a podcast dedicated to bringing you news and information about the Research and Development Tax Incentive Program and what this means for Australian businesses. Brought to you by the Department of Industry, Science, Energy and Resources.
Hi there, and welcome to the next episode of the RNDTI Insights podcast series. My name is Kayleen Flanagan from a division known as AusIndustry. Today, I'd like to talk more about the Research and Development Tax Incentive Program, or RNDTI. But to help me to do that today, I'd like to introduce two very special guests. They come from a company that has engaged with the RNDTI program since they were at startup stage. With the support of the RNDTI, Proteomics International has accelerated the development of a new diagnostic test for diabetic kidney disease. This test has the potential to save lives all over the world. With me today is Managing Director of Proteomics International, Dr. Richard Lipscomb, and Business Manager of ProMarker-D, Dr. Pearl Tan. Thank you so much for joining me, Richard and Pearl.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
So I guess firstly, can you tell us a little bit more about Proteomics International and the role you play in the organisation?
Yes, I'm the Managing Director at Proteomics International, and we're a company focused on new medical technologies. Our main emphasis is developing new diagnostic tests, particularly in areas like diabetes.
As the business manager, my role at Proteomics is to oversee the overall development of ProMarker-D, which is our flagship product, the predictive test for diabetic kidney disease. I'm also entirely responsible for the R&D program application process, from tabling records, the application form, and pulling together the records and evidence.
Great, thank you. So diabetic kidney disease, it certainly doesn't sound good. How does the diagnostic test work?
We've developed a test which can predict those who will go on to develop diabetic kidney disease 3 or 4 years in advance. We take a blood sample, and based on the protein fingerprint that we detect in that sample, we can identify with 85 to 90% accuracy who will develop diabetic kidney disease in 3 or 4 years' time.
Oh, it's amazing technology, and obviously significant benefits to the Australian healthcare system and economy alone. I know we've said it before, but companies that conduct R&D are more successful and contribute to economic growth at a higher rate than those that don't. So can you tell us more about the role R&D plays at Proteomics? I mean, how important is it?
R&D is the core part of what we do. It's 2/3 of our company's activities. We actually established ourselves as an R&D company. Our objective was to use new technologies in the life sciences, create new ideas, and come up with commercial products. In the area we operate, we think of ourselves very much at the cutting edge of our field. We like to apply these new technologies in the medical area.
I'd like to now ask specifically, though, what it was that led Proteomics to consider the RNDTI program. How did you hear about us?
We went to an information session. We were looking for programs to support our business in the early days, and through AusIndustry and similar bodies, we heard of this type of program. So that was the genesis for us to start to look into the program in more detail. In the early days, we worked with a tax consultant that helped us put together our application, learn about the process, make sure we followed the rules and that everything was compliant. We're now confident in how we do this so that we can complete the process in-house. And in terms of how it worked for us, at the start of 2002, we spent $100,000 on R&D. As of this year, we're spending over $2.5 million on R&D. So it's a program that's really grown with the company.
Okay, so did you engage or go to the information session at the time where you were planning to conduct your R&D?
So we'd established ourselves as an R&D company. So we already knew we wanted to do R&D. That was our core focus. The sessions were then available to us to explore how we could do our R&D better.
And it's definitely something we encourage companies to do as well, to understand more about the RNDTI before you undertake the activity. So during that planning phase, and it also helps with the self-assessment processes of the program. Can you tell us what kind of time and effort is needed to complete the annual application for registration?
So in terms of the application process, it's very straightforward overall, provided that you have good record-keeping procedures in place. Well, obviously, it's a year-long process to make sure that you maintain accurate records for all R&D expenses. But once you have these records in place, I would say it take about 2 to 3 days to pull together the application form and make sure that you have the eligible expenses recorded.
Okay, but the program provides a tax incentive for eligible R&D activities. How did you go about determining or self-assessing that proteomics activities were eligible under the program?
When I first took on the role to be in charge of the R&D program, I referred to the guidance on the website. There is this guide called Guide to Interpretation, and I use it as a primary source of information. It is a very extensive document, but it definitely helped me determine and work out which are the core activities, which are the supporting activities, what are eligible activities and what are not. And it's our go-to document and our Bible, essentially.
We hear that a bit.
And I also spoke to Oz Industry Consultant when I have some questions or further information that I require to determine what's eligible, and that has been very helpful as well. In the early days, as Richard mentioned, we use an external tax advisor, but now onwards, we have been doing the R&D application in-house. So we work with our project accounts team on record keeping, such as tracking and recording and coding R&D expenses to determine which are eligible activities. And then we go through the entire process and activities thoroughly to make sure that it lines up.
Great. And Pearl, you mentioned records. Thank you for mentioning this. Record keeping is such an important part of any business management process, and it's just as important with managing your R&D project, especially as you can keep those records as evidence to demonstrate your eligibility in the program.
For our company, the primary source of record keeping is through the lab minutes of our regular project meetings. So we have regular meetings and that's documented as part of the minutes and filed away. Records can also include regular presentation from research scientists and managers who will actually run through the team, the activities, the project objectives, hypothesis findings, and more importantly, conclusions. So how we went from a planning experiment to getting a result and providing new knowledge from the experiment itself. So that's more on the R&D activity side of things. In terms of accounting, we use a standard off-the-shelf accounting package, which is readily accessible to most companies. We would then work with the lab manager and the accounts team to determine how the expenses are coded. And for example, R&D activities are coded under R&D expenses. So at the end of the year, we could just pull out the record and table what expenses are under eligible activities.
Before I ask the next question, I realise that some listeners may not be aware that companies can apply for a finding to determine if their activities are eligible prior to registration. It's known as an advance overseas finding that can provide assurance to companies. But in some cases, such as in applying for overseas R&D activities, this process is mandatory. Now, Proteomics applied for an advance overseas finding. Can you explain what led you to apply for the finding?
If the work can't be done in Australia, obviously the next step is to identify where the expertise is and undertake the R&D in that location.
So in understanding and talking to Oz Industry Consultant, the overseas finding would give us certainty that the overseas R&D activity would be eligible under the program.
So I think listeners would like to know, though, what have been the main benefits for Proteomics from participating in the program? How has it helped your company?
It makes the dollar go further. It's allowed us over the years to invest $1 multiple times over, and it's really brought our projects through much faster. If we were forced to spend the money ourselves, the projects would have still happened, but they would have been slower. So it means that we can pursue our R&D faster because we can afford to, but it also means the company grows faster. We can bring our products through, we can be competitive globally, which would be difficult without this kind of R&D tax support.
Wonderful. And all your time and effort invested in the program, was it worth the benefit?
Absolutely. It's been very efficient and, relatively speaking, low in paperwork, particularly compared to other programs such as grants. They can be time consuming and onerous. And while there are always nuances in any program, broadly speaking, we feel this one's easy to understand and well written.
Now, the next question, Richard, is an important question. If you were registering for the first time, knowing what you do now, would you do anything differently?
I'm actually really happy with the way that we did things. It has worked well for us. Working with a tax consultant in the first instance helped us learn the ropes. Although I believe it is a program that companies can manage themselves, the process is straightforward when you read the instructions. The forms are simple. It helps you lay out the research, the project plan, and using that as a template is a good way to start.
Great advice. And I guess following on from that, what pointers would you give other companies considering the program?
From my perspective, my main advice would be to make sure that you're on top of record keeping and making sure that that's implemented into your day-to-day operations, and then everything is straightforward.
I would say plan it properly, make it hypothesis driven, ensure you ask the right questions at the start, and then work through things in a methodical way. If you plan carefully and thoroughly, then everything should fall into line and fit with how the program works. It's more likely to give you something that's going to solve the problem. Consider using the application for registration as a project plan. It's a very useful guide.
Finally, I think we'd all like to hear, what are the hopes for the diagnostic test in proteomics in the future?
We would like our diagnostic test for diabetic kidney disease, which we call ProMarker-D, we'd like that to make a difference on a global scale. It is about saving lives. At Proteomics International, we're building a company that applies these innovative tools to improve the treatment of disease. And ultimately, we want to help create a world where disease is detected early and cured simply. And you need a lot of R&D to do that properly.
Thank you so much, Richard and Pearl, for joining us today. I have really enjoyed learning more about Proteomics International and how you've used the RNDTI to support investment in cutting-edge research that is really making a difference in medical diagnostics. If you would like to know more about the RNDTI and how it may be able to support your company, please visit our website dedicated to supporting business at business.gov.au/RDTI. You can also find this podcast and other episodes on the website under News and Events. Thank you for listening. We look forward to sharing lots of information with you in the future. But if you have any topics or questions that you would like us to cover in future episodes, please email us at rdti.engagement@industry.gov.au. Goodbye until next time.